The house was overflowing that evening. Balloons clung to the ceiling, the smell of barbecue filled the air, and laughter echoed through the Blake family's Texas ranch home. It was supposed to be a celebration, the birthday of Marjorie Blake's grandson. At 74, Marjorie walked slowly into the crowded living room, her silver hair catching the glow of the chandelier. She carried a gift bag wrapped neatly in her careful hands, the kind of grandmotherly detail no one else seemed to notice anymore. She found a chair near her daughter-in-law, Cassandra, who was busy pouring glasses of wine for the guests. Marjorie tried to sit quietly, hoping to feel included. But before she could even settle, Cassandra leaned over, smirk tugging at her lips, and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "You're just Grandma. Leave the important things to us." The words sliced through the room sharper than any knife. For a heartbeat, silence lingered, and then came the chuckles. A few guests covered their mouths to hide their grins. Even Marjorie's own son lowered his eyes, saying nothing. Her cheeks burned. The laughter felt like it was pressing down on her chest, crushing the years of sacrifice, of love, of history she had poured into this family. But Marjorie didn't snap back. She didn't cry. Instead, she pressed her lips together and lifted her chin just slightly. And in that moment, if anyone had looked closely enough, they would have seen it, the faintest glimmer in her eyes. Not defeat, not shame, but a spark of something far more dangerous, determination. They called me just Grandma, Marjorie thought, her hands tightening around the gift bag. But they have no idea what I'm capable of, no idea what truth I'm holding on to. The party roared on, but for Marjorie, everything had already changed. The days after that birthday party felt heavier than the Texas summer heat. Marjorie noticed the changes, subtle at first. Her daughter-in-law Cassandra started making all the decisions, what school the children would attend, how the ranch's money was spent, even which family portraits hung on the walls. Marjorie's opinion, never asked for, her presence, barely acknowledged. One afternoon, she reached for the family photo album sitting on the coffee table. It was something she had carefully built over the decades, page by page, photo by photo. But when she opened it, her heart froze. Half the pictures were gone. The old black and white photos of her and her late husband building the ranch, her son as a boy riding on his father's shoulders, the holidays where she had cooked for 40 people erased. In their place were glossy prints of Cassandra's curated family dinners, vacations, and smiling snapshots. It was as if the foundation of the Blakes had been rewritten. And then came the whispers. At church, during Sunday fellowship, Marjorie overheard a cousin mutter, "She's just Grandma now. The Blake legacy belongs to Cassandra's line." Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to remind them whose hands had tilled the soil, whose sweat had paid the mortgage, whose faith had held this family together when her husband passed. But no one asked. No one listened. At dinner one night, Cassandra raised her glass and announced, "From now on, I'll be handling all the ranch business. It's time for fresh ideas, not old-fashioned ways." The table clapped. Even her own son forced a smile, nodding along. Marjorie sat in silence, her fork untouched. She looked around that table at the home she and her husband had built with their bare hands. And for the first time in 74 years, she felt like a stranger in her own house, a guest, an outsider. And yet, deep inside her, that same spark flickered again. If they want to erase me, she thought, then they've forgotten one thing. The truth never erases itself. The sound of Cassandra's laughter still echoed in Marjorie's ears that night as she sat alone on the porch. The house was quiet now, but her heart was not. Her eyes drifted toward the old barn at the edge of the property, its wooden beams weathered but still standing strong. And just like that, the memories came flooding back. She was 20 years old again, standing beside her husband, John Blake, under the blazing Texas sun. The land stretched out before them, dry, stubborn, unforgiving. Can we really build a life here? she had asked, sweat glistening on her brow. John had smiled, his arm around her shoulders. With your grit, Marjorie, we can build anything. And they did. Day after day, year after year, she worked those fields with her bare hands, hauling feed, mending fences, rising before dawn to milk the cows. While other women her age wore pretty dresses to town, Marjorie wore calloused hands and mud-stained boots. At night, when John was bone-tired, she balanced the books by candlelight, teaching herself numbers so they could pay off the bank and keep the ranch afloat. The flash of memory shifted her young son, barely 5 years old, chasing calves in the pasture. His laughter was the only music she needed. She cooked, she cleaned, she prayed. She gave him every piece of her youth so he could have a future. Then came the hardest memory of all, John's sudden passing, the funeral service where mourners whispered, "How will she keep the ranch going alone?" But she did. Through storms, droughts, and debts that could have swallowed them whole, Marjorie never let go. She became both father and mother, protector and provider. She was the one who signed every check, fixed every broken gate, carried the family name on her shoulders when no one else could. Now, decades later, she sat staring at that same barn, her chest heavy with both pride and sorrow. "I gave everything to keep this family alive," she whispered to herself. "And now they call me just Grandma." Her eyes welled, but no tears fell, because beneath the ache that spark of determination burned brighter. The legacy wasn't Cassandra's, it was hers. And though the family had forgotten, Marjorie never would. The nights in Texas were long and heavy. Crickets hummed in the fields, and the cicadas sang their mournful chorus. But inside her bedroom, Marjorie lay wide awake. She had heard the whispers again earlier that evening. From the hallway where Cassandra and her teenage grandson were talking in hushed voices. "She'll never know. She's too old to question anything." The words burned deeper than the summer heat. Marjorie pressed her hand to her chest, steadying her breath. They thought age made her blind. They thought silence meant weakness. But she had learned long ago, silence was power. The very next morning, she drove into town in her old Ford pickup, dust kicking up behind her tires. She parked far from the ranch, far from curious eyes, and walked into a small pharmacy on Main Street. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the box on the shelf, DNA test kit, a tool of truth disguised in simple cardboard. Back home, she moved carefully, secretly. When no one was looking, she clipped a strand of her grandson's hair from the back of his comb, sealing it quietly in the small envelope. Her own cheek swab followed, the sterile brush scraping softly inside her mouth. When she sealed the package and dropped it into the mailbox, her hands shook, not with fear, but with certainty. The truth was on its way, but she didn't stop there. That evening, Marjorie called an old family friend, a lawyer named Richard Hale, the man who had once helped her and John write the very first deed to their land. In his quiet office, Richard adjusted his glasses as she slid across the details. "Marjorie," he said carefully, "if what you suspect is true, this changes everything. Cassandra has no rightful claim. The law will be on your side." Marjorie looked down at her weathered hands folded in her lap. Her voice was steady. "I don't want revenge, Richard. I just want the truth, and I want my family's legacy protected." Richard nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure you're ready. When the truth arrives, we'll be holding the strongest cards at the table." As she stepped out of the office into the warm evening air, Marjorie lifted her chin. For weeks, they had erased her. For months, they had called her just Grandma. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt something return to her bones. Control. And in the silence of that Texas dusk, Marjorie whispered to herself, "They think I'm too old to fight, but the truth doesn't age." The envelope came on a Tuesday morning. It was plain, ordinary, almost forgettable, except Marjorie had been waiting for it with a heart that pounded every single day since she dropped the test in the mailbox. She carried it into the kitchen with hands that trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of everything that could be inside. She sat at the oak table where she'd served thousands of family meals, her late husband's Bible resting at the edge like a quiet witness. For a long moment, she just stared. Then, slowly, she slid her finger under the seal and tore it open. The paper inside was crisp, clinical, filled with words and percentages, but her eyes found the line that mattered. Exclusion confirmed, not biologically related. The world seemed to tilt. Her breath caught, her chest tightened, and for a second she thought her knees might give way. This boy, the boy she had rocked to sleep, the boy she thought carried her husband's blood, was not a Blake at all. A secret, buried for years, had just been unearthed. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. Because beneath the pain was something stronger. Vindication. They had called her just Grandma. They had pushed her aside, erased her from her own legacy. But now she held the weapon that could shatter Cassandra's lies in a single stroke. She placed the results back in the envelope, smoothing the paper with careful, deliberate hands. Then she slid it inside the family Bible, tucking it between the thin, delicate pages. "Lord," she whispered, her voice steady, "you've given me the truth. Now give me the strength to use it." That night, she sat on the porch as the sun bled orange across the horizon. The DNA results were safe in her lap, hidden inside the Bible. Her eyes glowed with a quiet fire. She had carried this family for decades. Now she would defend it one last time. And for the first time since Cassandra had sneered at her across that birthday table, Marjorie smiled. The truth was here. And soon, everyone would see it. The Blake family gathered again the following Sunday evening. The ranch house buzzed with chatter, silverware clinking against china, the smell of roast filling the air. To anyone else, it looked like a normal family dinner. But Marjorie sat at the far end of the table, a sealed envelope resting quietly in her purse, her fingers brushing against it every so often. She said nothing. She simply waited. Halfway through the meal, Cassandra raised her glass with that same smug smile. "Grandma, don't bother with business tonight," she said sweetly, her tone laced with venom. "You're not the future of this family. Leave that to us." The table chuckled. Heads nodded. The sting of that same humiliation from the birthday party rippled through the room again. But this time, Marjorie didn't flinch. Slowly, she set down her fork. Her hands were steady as she reached into her purse and pulled out the thick envelope. She laid it on the table with a soft thud that silenced the room. Her voice was low, deliberate, every syllable slicing the air. "You're right, Cassandra. I'm not the future of this family." She pushed the envelope forward, her eyes locking on her daughter-in-law. "But neither are you." The words dropped like a stone into water. The laughter died. The room froze. Her son's brow furrowed. "Mom, what is this?" Marjorie's eyes never left Cassandra as she unfolded the papers inside and spread them across the table. "DNA doesn't lie." The words were simple, but the impact was devastating. Her son's face drained of color as he scanned the results. His hands shook. This says he's not." His voice broke. Cassandra's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor. "This is a mistake," she snapped, her voice high and desperate. "Those tests are wrong, they don't mean anything." But no one moved, no one believed her. The silence in that dining room was heavier than steel. Marjorie leaned back in her chair, her expression calm, her authority undeniable. "For years, you've told me I didn't belong, that I was just Grandma. But the truth shows who the real outsider is." Her son buried his face in his hands. The grandchildren stared in shock. Cassandra's mask of control cracked, her lips trembling, her eyes darting for an escape she couldn't find. And Marjorie? She sat tall, silver hair glowing under the chandelier, the quiet power of truth radiating from her presence. The room had once laughed at her. Now it bowed to her silence. The dining room had fallen into a silence so thick, even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than breath. Cassandra's protests grew weaker with every second. This can't be right. DNA tests, they make mistakes all the time. But her voice cracked, her eyes darting wildly, searching for anyone to side with her. No one did. Her husband, Marjorie's son, pushed back from the table, his chair screeching across the wooden floor. He picked up the papers again, scanning them with trembling hands. His face was pale, his lips pressed tight. Finally, his eyes lifted to his mother. Tears welled as he whispered, "I should have believed in you, Mom. I should have protected you. I let her take everything." Marjorie's hand, lined with years of work and sacrifice, reached out and covered his. Her voice was calm, steady, the voice that had guided him since he was a boy. "You forgot who built this house, but remembering is what matters now." Within weeks, Richard Hale, the lawyer, moved swiftly. The DNA results and Cassandra's years of deceit unraveled in court filings and inheritance documents. Every acre, every account, every piece of the Blake legacy reverted back to its rightful name, Marjorie Blake. Cassandra's influence was stripped away. Her mask of control gone. She packed her things in silence, leaving the ranch behind, her power shattered by the truth she could no longer bury. Life didn't snap back overnight. The scars of betrayal lingered. But slowly, the ranch house began to feel whole again. Neighbors stopped whispering. Family members returned with quiet respect. And her son, humbled and broken, stood at his mother's side, ready to rebuild trust piece by piece. One evening, as they walked the fields together, he looked at her and said softly, "The ranch never belonged to her. It always belonged to you, to us." Marjorie smiled faintly, her silver hair catching the sunset glow. She didn't gloat. She didn't spit venom. She simply said, "Blood matters, but respect matters more." And with those words, the Blake family's foundation was restored. Not by shouting, not by revenge, but by truth, steady, unyielding, undeniable. The Texas sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Marjorie sat quietly on the wooden porch swing, the boards creaking gently beneath her weight. The evening breeze carried the scent of cut hay and wildflowers, the same scent she had breathed for more than half a century. In her lap rested the old family Bible. Tucked safely between its pages was the folded DNA report, no longer a weapon, but a record of the truth that had saved everything. Laughter rang out across the yard. Her great-grandchildren chased each other through the grass, their shoes kicking up dust, their giggles spilling into the twilight. They didn't care about bloodlines, property deeds, or family feuds. To them, she wasn't just grandma. She was the center of their world. Marjorie watched them with a soft smile. Her son stood nearby, arms crossed, his gaze heavy with both regret and renewed respect. He no longer looked past her, he looked to her. The porch light flicked on, casting a golden glow over her silver hair. She placed a hand gently on the Bible and whispered to herself, "They called me just grandma, but truth showed who the real outsider was. And in the end, the legacy was never theirs to take." The camera would pull back now if this were a film. The ranch stretching wide, the barn standing strong, the porch bathed in warm light, children's laughter echoing into the open sky. Not a scene of revenge, but of justice, of peace, of legacy restored. And in the quiet of that Texas evening, Marjorie Blake sat tall, not just a grandmother, but the matriarch who had protected her family's name, with nothing but silence, patience, and the undeniable power of truth.